Who knew I had so many friends? Oh my gosh. I'll let you all introduce yourself. There's too many of you this time.
You go first, Jen.
Yeah, I feel like it makes sense for me to go first. So I feel like I'm the star of the show, right? So yeah, my name's Anna McAbee. I work on Kyle's team, and I'm a security solutions architect. So I specifically focus on threat detection and incident response. So I'm going to go through some of the items that we're going to go through today and do some of the demos.
Awesome. I'm looking forward to it. This is a very demo heavy segment, which I'm very excited about because I know we hear demonstrations or demos are always fun to watch. I'm personally a fan of when demos don't go right, but these are professionals here, so they're going to go perfect.
Next, no pressure.
No pressure at all. Next, Rich, go ahead and tell us who you are, what you do.
Yeah.
Why are you here today?
Yeah. Thanks for having me again, Kyle. Excited to be here. So my name is Rich Vorwaller. I'm a product manager on the Amazon Detective team. Been here a couple of months. I'm actually a boomerang from Amazon. So I was here a couple years ago on the Edge Services team, and now I'm on what we call our ESS or External Security Services team. So excited to be here. I know Anna is going to do an awesome job. We've actually got a side poll going on how well she's going to do. So
I had a boomerang once and it never came back.
Oh, well,
yeah, it was defective.
But thanks again.
Cool. I'll go next. Marshall Jones. I'm a security solutions architect as well. I focus on all the native AWS security services and essentially helping customers adopt those services. If you're fans of demos that don't go exactly so well, there might be a Twitch video on YouTube somewhere that I was involved with from years back. But
you perfected the art of making demos not go right. So that's perfection still. Well, you're beloved in our hearts. So first, let's go and talk about what is detective.
Yeah, I can take that one. So detective is, I know you guys just kind of went through with guard duty. There's generating various findings. And then from there, it'll help you, analyze, investigate, and understand the root cause. So you got some sort of finding like a Bitcoin mining, and I'm going to demo that in a bit. How do you understand the scope? Like who created that EC2 instance that's Bitcoin mining? Really understanding the full scope and understanding the activities that are behind it. So it automatically does some of the log analysis, some of the analysis that may be a pain on the end user's end. It could automatically do for you and create those graphs. So that's really what we're going to go through today.
Awesome. And then last but not least, certainly not least, we have a new feature to Detective. Can we explain what we got going on there?
Yeah.
Anyone?
You want me to jump in on that one, Anna?
Yeah, you got it.
All right. So I've been told that the PowerPoint is a very rare occurrence on this show, but I actually have come prepared with a PowerPoint.
We give you a 3-slide limit.
A 3-slide limit. Awesome.
That's a hard limit.
This is good. This is going on my resume. My ability to show a PowerPoint on this show. So let me know if that's coming through for everyone.
Not quite yet, because I need to hit the button to bring it over there.
Beautiful. Awesome. So this is a feature that Detective launched in, I believe, just a little bit before reInvent last year, called Finding Groups. And then we just had another release a couple of weeks ago called Visualizations. And that's what we're hopefully going to show you here today. So Finding Groups is really designed to answer a very, very tough question. And that tough question is this finding a singular event, or is it potentially a bigger security issue? So if you look at like how findings occur, how security events occur, typically they're not, just one or two events. Usually it's a series of actions that have been performed, maybe, days, weeks, months, over time spans. And those can bring like multiple security findings, and they can do like multiple unusual behavior. So it's hard to kind of connect the dots and understand, is this really an issue for me to investigate, or is this something else of a bigger pattern. So I don't know if you can see it very well in my PowerPoint. Again, I apologize. But I've got a nice screenshot there of some guard duty findings. I think I got like 7 there. And they range from like, I believe there's a low for an EC2 instance on a brute force attack. And you go up to a medium for some unusual network activity, and then all the way to a high towards the bottom there, which is that first EC2 instance talking to a command and control center. So when we talked with customers and we said, how do you investigate those guard duty findings? A lot of them said, well, I instantly start with the highs and I try to understand the scope and the breadth of that. But it's kind of hard to understand if there is a relationship between those other findings. And, if you've got, tens or hundreds of those findings, it can get even more difficult. But if you take the same kind of information, and let me advance this just a little bit, and you use our visualizations, you can now start to get kind of a better context of what happened. So if you start over to the left, that same EC2 instance that had a brute force attack, also connected to a command and control server. It also, through an IAM finding, assumed a role in a user, tried to disable CloudTrail. Oh, and by the way, there was this new user agent that was involved in the whole thing. Now you actually start to get a better sense of what's happening and some of that context. Now, I want to be clear, this visualization that I built is not, purely out of the box. Marshall and Anna will show you today how you can kind of take our default visualizations and start to customize them. But it's just been a huge time saver for our customers to really kind of understand, okay, I see I have a high or a medium guard duty finding. I need to get more context. I need to know all the, what we call entities were involved. And that's really kind of the beauty of what finding groups does in the visualization. A nice side effect too is within finding groups, we have, we map all those findings to what's called the MITRE ATT&CK framework. So if you're not familiar with the MITRE ATT&CK framework, it's a very well-known framework that a lot of analysts use, and it does, techniques, tactics, and procedures, or sometimes TTPs. And it may be hard to see in my screen there, but those are those little dots towards the bottom. It's not really a compliance standard or any kind of regulatory standard. Rather, it's just kind of a well-used framework that helps you understand, what are the motives? What are my attackers trying to go after? Why do I always see them start with maybe, defense evasion and things like that?
So they're trying to get rich as dad jokes. That's what's happening here.
Did I say a dad joke?
No, they're just what's showing here is how they're going to try to obtain your dad jokes through initial access, defensive evasion, and using command and control.
Yes. Yeah. Well, the dad jokes are the crown jewel. So
how a dad joke's a dad joke, right?
Yes, the dad joke is the best.
So, anyways, the punchline's apparent.
Nice. Nice. But anyways, the intent is just to kind of push that back into your kind of process and procedures to make sure you understand, what is kind of these national tactics. So last slide, I promise. This is just an overview of what finding groups does. And I've just kind of share this to helpful to understand kind of the undifferentiated heavy lifting that finding groups does for customers. So as a detective customer, finding groups, automatically will ingest all your guard duty findings. And it at a high level does kind of 3 processes. So the first thing that it does, it really kind of gathers evidence. So what is evidence? Evidence is anything kind of unknown or suspicious. So an example may be a new geolocation that we've never seen, a new API call that's never been issued, a new autonomous system number, anything that's kind of like, one of these things is not like the other. And it will gather that information and then relate that to the finding group. The second thing that it does is it does what's called, sometimes we refer to this as statistically relevant, but it establishes what's called a relevant relationship. So a relationship is, it's anything that's really kind of has a connection that is meaningful and has a direction. So an example, a very, very basic example is, we could, within Detective, you could look at an EC2 instance and you could look at all the findings that an EC2 instance has. And that's a very direct, relatable relationship. But what gets hard is kind of the inferred relationships. This is where, if X is related to Y and Y is related to Z, then indirectly X is related to Z as well. So in that example that I had of the visualizations of, an EC2 instance that had a brute force attack that communicated to command and control center that did the IAM, Finding groups would find that relevant information because it spanned across all those AWS resources within kind of a single event. So it really kind of helps you do that kind of 6 degrees of separation investigation, where even though this finding or this entity aren't directly related, they are indirectly related because of the single event that happened. And that's the power of what kind of those relevant relationships are. Last but not least is it kind of creates that finding group. Now that may sound a little bit kind of, well, of course it has to create the finding group, but it's not a one and done thing. So the finding group is a very living investigation. So if you have a finding group and you're in the middle of a security investigation and a new finding comes in that touches those entities, that finding group will get updated and it will reflect the new finding that happened. We also have this concept of called kind of a parent and child finding group. So for example, if you've got, two distinct finding groups, but then later on a relationship is discovered, you would actually see that reflected in the detective service as well, that these are now kind of related and here's how it is. So again, it's just kind of that intent to be kind of an ongoing, evolving kind of security investigation, rather just hey, we produced a report or something of that nature. So that's it. Those are my last slides, I promise. Nothing more. I want to give Marshall and Anna the majority of the time so they can actually demo it and show it in action. But super excited to give this to our customers and see how we can help them. And so take it away.
Awesome. And thank you, Rich, for explaining that in such great detail. And as I mentioned, the slides really bring home a point to help us understand. And it sounds like the visualizations aren't just visualizations to look, nice and shiny, but to actually make actionable steps for incident responders, threat hunters, whomever is responsible for responding to a security event or addressing guard duty findings. Now, before we go on to our demo, we have a question, and I don't know if this is just a funny remark, but does the gray man theory apply to data security, having something more secure to capture attackers' attention, or do most attackers scrape everything? What do we think? I feel like this is a very philosophical kind of question. And has anyone here done any offensive assessments before? I know back in my day when I would do pen testing, right here. Yep, it works. You would kind of start wide and then hone in on what had flaws. So I feel like that's more of a philosophical idea. What does the chat say? What say you, friends? And then also, someone does recognize real grape flavored red vines are the supreme flavor. So there we go. And not to distract from the next awesome part of this conversation, a demo of what detective is and how we could use detective for an investigation based on guard duty findings. And so, Anna, your screen is up. Take it away.
Awesome. Yeah. So I think I'm not going to super reiterate on guard duty. I think, they obviously had this awesome demo before us. So in general, though, we have these findings, right? And we want to make sense of them. So one thing that I did to kind of make sense of these is severity. So with the high severity finding, that means that we feel like there's an active security event within your environment. So what you can do to leverage detective, you can just use this button. And then from there, you can pivot on a number of items. So you could do the guard duty finding, you could do the EC2 instance, the account. In this situation, I'm going to use the EC2 instance, but there's a number of scopes you can leverage in order to understand and investigate the issue. And so also, once we go from here, you'll see that you'll be able to pivot between a few different items and entities. So from here, we can look at this EC2 instance. So I'm going to take a step back. We can see when it was created. So it looks like it was created on Wednesday this week. It was created by the admins, where it was associated with the VPC. But we can also see a number of findings that are associated with it. So this is helpful to understand kind of the full scope and really get the root cause. So that's where detective comes into play, is understanding the root cause, understanding the scope, who created this EC2 instance, why is this now a finding, to really kind of understand the true full story of the incident. So as we kind of keep going down, you could look at the VPC flow volume. And so you could see, and you can kind of keep going down around the outbound traffic, inbound traffic. And so you could see here these various IP addresses. Then from there, you can understand, if you wanted to go through and say, okay, we have these EC2 instances that are associated with Bitcoin mining, we may want to look at who created these. We could kind of go from there, look at these admin AWS roles, and kind of dive deeper into that. So from here, I think I'll hand it off to Marshall, and who can go through more in scope.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks for showing that. And I know one of the big things that comes with an investigation is creating all these different correlations or context, right? For understanding what resources could be impacted, and that context is what helps us determine, do we have an active security event, or is this potentially a false positive? And Marshall is going to show us how to use these new findings to conduct such investigation. Is that right, Marshall?
Absolutely.
Jones? Awesome. All right. So we have your screen up.
All right, that sounds good. So I'll take this back a couple steps. So imagine that you're, Kyle 10 years ago, and you're a security analyst, and you've got a guard duty finding, and you say, like Anna was showing you, right? I can see this guard duty finding. I can see the related resources, but do I have a bigger security issue here, or is this a kind of a singular thing that's going on, right? How do I gather different data sources and understand whether or not things are related to one another, or what's really correlated across potentially a single account, potentially hundreds or thousands of accounts in an organization. As a security analyst, you might have a wide environment that you need to look around for. So the detective team thought about that, right? And that is really what drove finding groups, is helping with this correlation of, hey, look, we've got a guard duty finding, or we have an instance that is associated with a bunch of guard duty findings, but were there other instances involved in this? So I'm going to start out on the finding groups page, and you can see I've been playing around a little bit in this environment. I got a few finding groups, but we'll go ahead and just click on the first one and show you all what this looks like, right? So you get onto the finding groups page, and you can see details, right? First off, is this still active? And like Rich said, if it's still active, if new things are associated with this or correlated with this, they get added to this as well, right? We can see severity of this. We can see the scope time. So this tells us the time frame of when this activity even happened, right? If we need to drill down into anything later, we need to make sure we're either looking around these dates, or maybe before or after these dates, depending on what we're looking for our investigation. I'm sure everybody hopefully has their incident response playbooks set up so they know what information they need to gather to make decisions in their own organization, whether you're doing that through some sort of Jupyter notebooks like Anna might do, or you've got that printed out on your desk, like potentially Kyle might be doing. So.
Or shameless plug, there's a customer response framework created by the AWS Customer Incident Response Team that is available on GitHub, on AWS's GitHub page, where it'll help develop those incident response processes and procedures.
Absolutely great stuff if you haven't seen that already. So I'm going to scroll down a little bit first. In the finding groups, when this originally was launched, this feature, we could see all the involved entities, AWS resources that were associated with this finding group. So we can see things like EC2 instances, all of the associated findings with that EC2 instance. But there were also common denominators when it comes to IP addresses that had various findings, right? So the visualization that Anna showed before, look, we can really dive deep and answer questions on when things were created, data like VPC flows associated with EC2 instances. Here we can see all of these things grouped together. So we're seeing, these different entities. Hey, look, there's a second EC2 instance that's associated with this and the different findings. So we also have another tab where we can see all the involved findings listed out and the associated entities. So it gives us a couple different looks. What Rich talked about earlier is the new visualization. So that's really what we want to highlight here, right? And if I scroll back up, we can see these visualizations.
Now, the visualizations, those are generated from the finding groups, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So,
and do you need to do anything to get started with finding groups, or is that once you're using Detective, it's good to go?
No, absolutely. That's a good question. So Detective, this is automatically done for you being a Detective customer. Detective is very much a managed service in the fact that it's collecting the logs on your behalf. So you're not needing to set up infrastructure to do that. It's doing this resource relationship and correlation for you automatically without you needing to tune or configure anything. So it's very quick time to value from a security investigation perspective.
I remember the days of needing to manage a SIM, but this isn't a SIM per se. But no, the magic words of not having to manage infrastructure is a big win. Just because, managing infrastructure is there's a lot of technical overhead, and there's use cases for it, certainly. But for to be able to start investigations as soon as possible, it sounds like enabling guard duty and then Detective would be a quick way to go about doing that, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So, security folks can focus on, investigations, on finding that needle in the haystack, less time standing up infrastructure just to gather data, just to create correlation, to understand things like what we're looking at here.
And that's where Kyle was 10 years ago, not Kyle now. So if you wanted to be Kyle 10 years ago, managing infrastructure to be able to correlate logs, how about it?
Cool. So if we look at these visualizations, though, we've got a few different things that you can see here. So one, I'm going to point out the legend, right? Because if you don't know what these different icons are, maybe not as familiar with the different AWS icons, this will make it very easy for you there. And then, frankly, we have different views, right? So we have this force directed view that we're looking at now, circular view, and you can see some of the resource names associated with this, and then also a grid, and you can see these lines are associated with other resources that it's connected to, or other entities that it's connected to. I personally like the force directed, so I'm going to go back to that. But in this, you can see that we can move this around. We can move different resources around. Maybe we want to group the different guard duty findings here. But we also see the common link that even created this finding group, right? So like there's this IP address that was common to two different guard duty findings.
That rascal.
Yeah. So we know that this is something that we should potentially look into, right? Because it's spanning a couple different pieces of our environment. Maybe it's a little bit more targeted, or just it's affecting multiple things, right? Another thing to point out too is like Anna showed, going down into the EC2 instance. You can do that from here, right? So you can click on multiple different findings or multiple different entities in this visualization. For example, we've clicked on a few findings. I'll click on this EC2 instance in this IP address. You can see they've kind of over here in this right column. And we can also, if we want to, pivot from here into those, directly into those resources and start answering those questions that might be in our incident response playbook.
Now, this is all made possible because Detective utilizes a, what kind of database?
So it's a graph database that does this in the back end to create this correlation.
Awesome.
Yeah, there's certainly lots of logic that goes into it. The team is very interesting to listen to when it comes to how this correlation works, so the statistical models to understand how everything groups together. So a really great technology to bring this all, but bring this directly to you in a nice visual, so you're not the one doing that correlation, right? That's the main point here.
Now, how does the visualization say supplement the finding groups to kind of like help with incident response?
Yeah, so for me, I'm certainly more of a visual person, right? So I could, you can look at the different entities, and obviously you'd want to have this listed out so you have, great detail here. But the visualizations really make it easy to understand what is all involved. I can understand what findings are involved. I can understand IPs and everything, and then pivot from there to understand where I might need to go to start answering questions. And then once again, we see different things like the TTPs that are associated with these different findings, and can understand the types of activities that are even associated with this security issue in this environment.
Awesome. And now someone asked, does it work with outposts?
Does it work with outposts? That is a good question. I don't know if Rich can answer that question.
Currently, no. So the data sources that we use are CloudTrail, guard duty findings, VPC flows, and then last a year we did launch EKS audit logs. So I'm assuming that question is maybe from EKS Anywhere, things like that. So it is on. We've heard that from customers, so it is on something we're looking at. But right now, those are kind of the main data sources that we look at.
Great, thank you for that explanation.
Mm-hmm.
Sounds like somebody's having a party.
Yeah.
I think
Is it your dog, Marshall?
That's the dog.
I knew it.
If you're hearing the jingling in the background, that's my son having a great time.
That's why the dog is hiding in the office.
Oh yeah, definitely.
So we looked at findings. Detective overall. You don't need to enable log sources for it to be able to create these findings because it's being fed by guard duty. Do they have that right?
Yeah, absolutely. So detective essentially, like Rich said, collects a few different data sources, those CloudTrail logs, VPC flow logs, guard duty findings, and EKS audit logs to create these different correlations as well as create these findings, or to create these findings groups based on the different guard duty findings.
Awesome. And when using these different types of finding groups, from a like security analyst point of view, and maybe even just like customer feedback, how would you say this could help speed up the time to respond to a security event?
Cool. Anna, you want to take this? I don't want to steal the show.
Yeah. So I think the idea here is like when you receive these kind of findings, you're able to quickly actually analyze, understand some of these relationships much more quicker. So you could use something like a SIM in order to solve the issue, but you'd have to manually create all of these queries and things along those lines. So the idea here is like you could more seamlessly do that without manually creating all these queries, and do that quicker to map these relationships.
Awesome. Thank you for that insight. Now, is there anything else you'd like to say before we kind of wrap things up today?
One thing I'll point out too is that detective. I mean, you might get an alert from a number of different places, right? You might have other security tooling in your environment, or just somebody reaches out to you for something. You can use other things in detective, such as the search functionality to look for different resources in the environment. If you want to start some ad hoc looking into a resource. this is another option you have when investigating and using detective to really dive into answer questions about resources and what relationships exist across your environment. So just another feature of detective I think is underutilized and I want, definitely want people to know about.
There's also quite a few. I don't know, Marshall, if we got time, might be worth just going over those summary pages as well. Those are some really good spots to start an investigation as well. So these are some of these, we call them summary page panels, but these are some of the good places to start. So if you could scroll down just a bit, roles and users with the most API call volume, EC2 instances with the most traffic. And then if you keep on scrolling down, we actually have those, we talked about that evidence, the newly observed geolocations. So we definitely have customers that are kind of reactive to guard duty findings, and that's how they use detective. But we also have quite a few that they actually, do their little poking and around and threat hunting within detective, and that's how they start their investigation. So it's a kind of versatile scenario with those summary panels that customers use.
Awesome. Yeah, it looks like those summary panels are things that I would commonly want to look for as an incident responder, or at least a threat hunter, to understand what is abnormal in my environment. Especially newly observed geolocations too, because if it's not common for one part of the world to be communicating to resources or my AWS account, there might be something afoot, some funny business, as they say.
Absolutely.
Awesome.
Great. Well, thank you everyone for the awesome demos and explaining how we could use detective to look at guard duty findings even further, correlate the different resources that are part of a guard duty finding, and help our incident responders and threat hunters even better. So there's actually some folks that are asking, where can they get more online training or maybe some hands-on stuff with detective?
Yeah, that's a great question. Marshall actually put together just recently a workshop. I don't know, Marshall, you want to talk about that?
Yeah, so there's two different things that I'll point to. There's a detective getting started free online course through the training and certification portal that folks can use. And then we also just recently released a detective workshop that you can run essentially with your account teams. We will set up accounts and run people through this workshop and where they can get hands-on with going through simulated findings and how you would do those investigations. And that is a public workshop, though. If folks want to go look through what's all involved there, you can certainly go look at how you can do an investigation using detective.
Awesome. Thanks, Marshall. I appreciate that. And again, thank you again for your time. This has been an awesome way to spend my Friday, I know, because security is a very passionate subject of mine, but also hosting AWS On Air is another great passion of mine. This is just so much fun. I get to hang out with my friends, get to learn about new technologies, and get into some different weird situations, right? There was a question that we didn't really dive into guard duty in detective, but we scratched it high level. Maybe what we'll do is, in fact, I don't want to spoil it. Okay, I'll spoil it since you asked so nicely. So I host a show called AWS On Air Lockdown, which is a security-focused show for AWS On Air. And maybe I can convince Marshall and Anna to come back on and we can do a deep dive of using detective where, we're not, so pressed for time, and maybe even talk more about the workshop that you built, Marshall. How about that? I'll convince you after the weekend, though, because you're probably sick of me this week.
Yeah. Only so much Kyle per week.
Yeah, Kyle, I think you need to buy us both a beer and then we'll think about it.
Okay, sounds good. That is fair. Some 16-ounce curls.
Yeah.
Or 19 if it's an imperial pint. Do I have that right?
Yeah, I think we could definitely do a deep dive. So yeah, we'll figure it out.
Awesome. Well, thank you, friends. You all have a wonderful, wrong button. Whoa, free beer. There's no such thing as a free beer. Someone pays for something.
That's true.
All right, friends.
Yeah, I mean, I'll take a free beer. If somebody's offering it, I'll take it.
Sounds good. All right, friends. Well, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it. And as always, it's a pleasure to have you all to talk about detective.